All right, we are live on YouTube, and give us about 30 seconds. And then just a friendly reminder that we will be controlling the screens that you're watching up there from back here. So Dr. Harrington, if you can remind me to advance the slides as needed. Thank you. You're good to go.
All right. Going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. We will rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance, and we'll get started.
Ready? Salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will now move to approve the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda. I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Tonight we're going to have a presentation from Dr. Harrington on the presentation of the Unification feasibility study. Once he starts presenting, the board will go down and sit in the audience so we can all watch the presentation. If anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, I know that you don't know what's going to be presented quite yet unless you read the entire report. Please fill out a card. They're located in the back, or Karen has some here on my right, your left, and she can get those to us. So when Dr. Harrington is done, we can get your questions and get you an opportunity to speak. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Harrington, and we'll go sit in the crowd.
Thank you. This is the first part of a two-part report, because Unification study has an educational component, organizational component that we have not yet done. Because if you look at the report, there's a section in the report that says a unification study cannot go forward unless it's economically viable. So that's where we start first. Let's look at the district's economic viability, and we'll talk about a proposed district. Thank you about the questions. We would like to answer any board questions before we go to audience questions. We'll do that first in that order. First of all, let's talk about the context of the meeting. So if we go to this slide on the context. Why are we here? Why are we looking at these options? First of all, you need to know we have declining enrollment throughout the whole county. 16.2% of the countywide, we are declining over the last 4 years. If you look at the state fiscal accountability report, we are the third. It was Los Angeles County, Ventura County, and Sonoma County, in that order, have declining enrollment. And of course, proportional population, LA County has over 10 million people in it, Ventura County has over 5 million people in it, and when you look at Sonoma County, which has 500,000 people in it, and we're losing third largest, greatest population of students. So that's one of the reasons we're looking at this, because all the districts in the West County face declining enrollment. West Sonoma County Union High School District has a structural deficit built within its budget. What does that mean? It means it has an operational practice that creates a deficit in their annual budget. So it's structural. What do? You look at the district's built-in operations. Last year, the district looked at its facility as a built-in operational practice. It also will need to look at its programs as their operational practice. And we'll go into that, because when you look at like-sized school districts, you'll find that you have about 30 to 40 more staff than the other like-sized school districts. Why is that? Well, we'll look at your program. How are you building it? What are you offering in your program that creates for overstaffing? Because all like-sized districts of your student population and of your like-size configuration, you have more staff. We'll get in. If you looked into the report, you could see that. The other thing we're going to talk about is the other steps West Sonoma County Union District has looked at. And those things are what I just talked about, is the staffing situation. All of these contribute to structural deficits. And if you could go to the next slide. County superintendent, what is his or her role in dealing with this? Well, as a county superintendent, you have financial oversight of the districts. You don't operate them, you don't manage their funds. What you do is you hold them accountable to state standards. One of the state standards for a school district is they must adopt a budget in the year they're currently operating, and will that budget sustain 2 additional years of operation? If a district cannot sustain its budget in the second or third year, it's either qualified, meaning that it's deficit spending most likely, or it's negative, that they can't cover their expenses. If a district is negative, the county superintendent has then direct oversight responsibilities of the district. So your board would exist, but it would not be making financial decisions. The way that would work is that the county office would determine what goes on the board's agenda for financial expenditures. We would determine what you can afford to spend your money on. And that's usually done through a special advisor that comes from the state. Basically, you're put under a trusteeship. The district has fought diligently and admirably to stay out of that situation. Many of the decisions this board has had to make have not been popular because they have had to make those decisions. Those are tough calls, and they've had to make them to keep themselves positive. So I commend the board, because the board members, I don't know, Jeannie's here and Kelly may be here. We've had talks for over 10 years with the district about its financial structural deficits. You've got to address these deficits. You can't just leave them in the system. The board has taken that to heart. Multiple boards have, and they've tried to work on it. In this study, there are 11 districts that serve approximately 6,000 students. West County's high school has 10 elementary feeder school districts. The primary question asked by the high school board in its resolution of last March, not this March, March of 2021, was, would West Sonoma County Union High School District benefit from unification? What are they doing? They're doing their due diligence to find out whether or not it's fiscally feasible for them to be unified, and would they create a better benefit for the students in the county. So we took that question. Also, because they had to deal with the issue of closing a high school, they had a second question. And the second question we'll get into is whether it would benefit to have 2 separate districts, and we'll talk about that as an option. Unification studies are very rare. There hasn't been a unification study done in California since 2013, and that one was done for Santa Barbara, and that was the last one that I'm aware of, and that's only because Santa Barbara had 1 board, 2 districts. So it was an easy unification. When the state went to LCFF, and Santa Barbara is a basic aid district, they just said, we'll just make one LCAP, we'll do 1 plan. We became unified. That was an easy solution to their problem. Your problem is a little more challenging because you have 11 districts in this unification study. And it's the first to be done with the new state funding model. The new state funding model came in after the 2008 through 2011 recession. The state converted to a new funding model called local control funding. We had to look at several qualified candidates since no study has been done like this before. Someone asked me, why does it take so long to do the study? Well, 1, no one's ever done this type of study on the refinancing model. 2, we had to look at qualified candidates. So the county sent out a request for proposals. 5 candidates, qualified candidates submitted. Then first we did request for qualifications, then we did request for proposal. The firm selected was Christie White & Associates as the most qualified firm to do this study. It was just in our due diligence in reviewing the eligibility of the candidate, was Christie White & Associates have done the audits on this district. Christie White and Associates did the audits on some of the elementary districts. So in the terms and conditions of this study, to make it neutral, outside agents in her firm were assigned this particular study. No one that does any of the audits of the elementary districts or any of the audits for the high school district were involved in this study. It's totally independent. If we can go to the next set of slides. The next slide. I forget to tell you to move the slides, I'm sorry. Next slide. Who do you have here tonight? Well, of course, the county superintendent's here, but Christy, would you raise your hand? So you know she's the CPA in charge of doing the study. Erin Stagg, who is the legal counsel for the County Committee on District Unification and Reorganization. So she represents the county committee as assigned legal counsel. Greg Medici is the Deputy County Superintendent for Business Affairs, and Sarah Lampenfeld is the Director of External Fiscal Services. She monitors the district's budget on a regular basis, month to month, from our point of view as it comes into us. So this is who's doing tonight's presentation, so let's get into the study. In previewing this study, with the 11 districts, there are multiple combinations. We have narrowed our focus to 3 basic combinations. We will present the following scenarios and then take questions. Full unification was the primary question presented by the board, and we will look at that. The other request from the board was 2 unified districts. One, the Russian River Valley area, another centered around Sebastopol, with its own board and superintendent administration, and the Russian River Valley with its own board, superintendent, and administration. A third option developed, and this is quite unique, and it's based on the state funding model. When we look at the 2 studies, as requested, we also discovered that, well, if they did this, this might be financially beneficial to the community. And that's the third option, and we'll go into that. So the study is, the next slide, please. So let's look at the county as a whole. I don't know how well you can see that, but that's the county, and there are 40 school districts in this county. LA County has 80 school districts. San Bernardino has 45, San Diego has 45, Kern County has 43, and then we have come to Sonoma County. Now we're the smallest geographic area with the greatest number of districts in the state of California. So that's one of the reasons. Most of our districts are left over from the one-room schoolhouse, era, and I have a map that goes back to 1897. There were 163 school districts in this county at one time. So when someone talks about consolidation, I think we've done a pretty good job. But it is now, we are now in the 21st century, so we are looking at this. In the 1950s was when the county consolidated. So when you see a district using the word union, it's when 2 districts come together of like form. Right now, Sonoma County, as I said, has the 40 school districts. The unifieds are Sonoma Valley, Cotati Roanoke Park, and Windsor, and Healdsburg. They're all unified school districts. And they feed other, and then you have the districts that feed into, take other districts into consideration, one of which is West Sonoma County. It's a Union High School District, and it takes in the 10 elementary districts. You have Petaluma City Schools, which takes in its feeder districts, Waug, Cinnabar, Liberty, a few others down there, Two Rock, some of those. Then you have Santa Rosa City, which takes in its own elementary district, but it takes in Roseland, Bellevue, Bennett Valley, Rincon Valley. So those are some of the districts it takes in. So next slide. We're going to use a few terms, so I want you to understand the terms we're using in the study. State aid. Local control funding formula is state aid, meaning that the district receives the money it gets from the state, and it's set on a state average, and each district, I'd like to say, would get the same amount, but it doesn't. It's based on their original base rate, and then it's averaged. So we have several districts in this study that are state aid districts. Those are wrong county, wrong districts. Those are West Sonoma County Union High School District and Twin Hills. Those are both state-funded school districts. Then we have community-funded school districts. They used to be known as basic aid, but basically what it says is these districts live off their property tax. That means the property tax meets or exceeds the state aid base, and the local community gets to hold on to those funds for that purpose, for educational purposes. Several of the districts in this study are basic aid or community funded. Then we're going to talk about the Thompson Unified or Thompson Unification. This is an option that was created back in 1993 when Congressman Thompson was a state senator. And that really is a byproduct of the Windsor Unification and the Healdsburg Unification. When Windsor broke away from Healdsburg and became its own unified school district, Healdsburg was sort of left there standing alone, Healdsburg Union High School District, so it became a unified district. But its two elementary feeder districts on both sides, West Side School District and Alexander Valley School District, are not part of the unified district, but their students have access rights to the unified school district for secondary students. So this is called a Thompson Unification. We're going to look at scenario one, so if we could go to that slide, please. Scenario one is full unification. What does it look like? Well, if you look at the total yellow area, I guess that's sort of a yellowy green in the map there, but basically it's the most financially challenging proposal or scenario due to the fact that you're merging basic aid, which are many of the elementary districts in this study, they're state funded. That means they get more money to spend per child than the state minimum. You're merging them together with a high school district and a state-funded district of Pleasant. What did I just say? What's the elementary district, Sarah?
Twin Hills.
Twin Hills, thank you. I get Twin Hills and Two Rock. There's 40 of them. A full unified district. This would also, when you merge them all together, this would create a state aid district as a whole, because the property tax would not cover all students in that area. Therefore, it is dependent, this particular study is dependent on the state for financing. It results in an immediate loss of $14 million in basic aid funding, requiring for this new district to operate, it would have to cut and carefully budget management and planning to initiate this model. Christy, do you have anything to add from the financial point of view?
Yes, thank you. So 14 million is about 15% of the current budgets all added together of these districts. So it's a very significant fiscal cliff that would happen. And the new Unified Districts Board would have to figure out ways to cover this cost. Otherwise, the new district would essentially be financially bankrupt in year one. So it's a very challenging scenario, this first one, in order to come up with costs that can be cut in such a manner as to be in effect that first year.
So if the public voted this in, the new board, because it wouldn't be this board and it wouldn't be the pre-existing boards, would have to start dealing with how would we build this budget with $14 million less than they were currently receiving. If you go to the next slide, scenario 2, this slide is in two halves, two sections. It's to split up the West Sonoma County Union High School District into two districts. You could create two unified districts, each with its own board, its own superintendent and administration, with a high school. The Russian River Valley Area District would only include, though, 22% of the high school enrollment, which once again creates a challenge to house high school students on a campus built for 1,500 students. But you could make it a 712 campus, and that might fill out the capacity of that facility. And then you would create the West Sonoma County Unified District, which would include the remaining 78% of the students. So that's, but once again, these districts are basically the Russian River Valley Unified and the West Sonoma County Unified. How would they be financially, Christy?
So the Russian River Valley Unified would be a basic aid school district, but still, because you're bringing in additional enrollment from the high school district, the whole would be less money than they are separately. So there would be a revenue shortfall of about $1.7 million that the Russian River District would need to find cost savings for. In looking at the cost side, there appears to be opportunity to find 3 to 5 million in savings. So this proposal is less risky than the first one, but still there would be planning that would be required. And then for the remaining West Sonoma district, it would be even a bit more challenging. It would be a state-aided district with revenues that are about 4 million less than the existing districts before unification. And cost savings would have to range between 4 to 6 million, which is feasible when I look at the comparative districts, but still would require a lot of advanced planning.
So if we go to the next slide, we're still talking scenario 2, and this just shows you the proposed district would consist of basic aid districts, El Molino, Monterey, Oak Grove, Fort Ross, Montgomery, Guerneville, and Forestville districts. And then the district would lose, as Christy said, close to 1.7 million, but there's a generated savings. Christy, what did you determine the cost? How do you generate savings?
Well, the new board would be the one to determine where those savings could be achieved, but a little bit later I'll be talking about how I estimated the potential for cost savings. Many of those savings come from the personnel side of the budget as you're consolidating programs. Obviously, there's duplicative administration cost and board costs, superintendent costs, business services, and so forth. Those could be reduced. It's more challenging when it comes to classified staffing because classified staff have a 2-year right to their position and pay after a reorganization. So some of these cost savings might realistically only be achieved over a period of several years.
And then we go to the next slide, which shows us the smaller West Sonoma County Union School District or Unified School District. And that's the lower portion. The second West Sonoma district would consist of Gravenstein, Sebastopol, Harmony, Twin Hills, which includes Annalee High School. The district would be state-funded, LCFF funded, and this creates an estimated lost revenue of about 4.2 million. And once again, this might be covered by cost savings. You want to address the last bullet there, Christy?
Correct. So under this scenario, the new board would again look at areas they could save in administrative and staffing cost and try to make up for that revenue shortfall that's estimated around $4 million.
Now, the study goes into great detail on the financing of each of the 11 districts and how they are operate their funding. When looking at that, we looked at the scenario 3, which was not part of the board's original request, but my job as the county superintendent is to provide the best benefit for students and community. So this report identifies one of the best benefits for students and community. The proposal merges the 2 state aid districts, West Sonoma County Union High School District and Twin Hills, into a Thompson-style unification, which allows for the other 9 elementary districts to opt out. So if I go to the next slide, what does that look like? Well, I don't think, well, you can see that, but that's a yellow with black hash marks on it. And what it means is that, and the little white lines are the elementary districts. So the secondary students would all go into the unified school district, and Twin Hills, which does not have hash marks in it, would be in the base of the high school district. The new unified district would have no revenue loss, but could save roughly $2 million a year in redundant operating costs. And then if you look at the next slide, and then I'll go to Christy for clarification. The next slide, thank you. The remaining 9 elementary districts could become one unionized single school district funded, which would mean it would not lose its basic aid status, but become one district. And it would. Did it just go out? Oh, it did. I'll use my teacher voice. The remaining 9 elementary districts would then unionize into one single district and be totally community funded. They would not be state aid funded. Okay, just hold it. And the model, and that basically, that district would be a benefit. In fact, we'll talk about how much of a benefit it would bring to the students. This model would preserve local funding, but allow us significant cost savings totaling potentially $7 million a year. So Christy, you want to go over these scenarios and how the savings and the revenue was generated?
Correct. So in order to try to preserve this basic aid or community funding that these districts have, which is pretty unique actually to throughout the state. There's very few districts that have this advantage, but it is a wonderful advantage to have this extra money. So to preserve that, we separated the basic aid community districts together in one large unionized elementary school district that could then save a considerable amount of money in terms of costs because you're consolidating administration. Potentially, you could even be consolidating schools where it makes sense and programs. So I think it would be an estimated $7 or even more million that might be saved in that elementary. Now, for West Sonoma County High School District and Twin Hills, 2 state-aided districts, there is no additional revenue. There is a smaller number in terms of potential savings, but certainly there's probably some district level administrative types of cost that might be able to be reduced if you had one administration over the K-12 district.
Okay, the next set of slides are yours. You want to come up here?
Yes.
We're going to get into the methodology. How do we determine these numbers? How do we look at these things? And Christy's the expert on numbers, so I'm going to let her answer those questions.
Thank you, Dr. Harrington. Next slide, please. So I want to talk just a little bit about the study methodology. And I know that a full copy of the study is available on the county office's website if you don't already have a copy. It's not the lightest reading. There's a lot of numbers in here and a lot of formulas, as state finance is very complex. So in doing the study, first of all, I wanted to make sure that we had consistent data that was reported by all of the districts to the county and to the state. So the data that was used was the most current closed fiscal year. So that was actually the 2021 fiscal year. And the reports are published, they're available on the Department of Ed's websites and other related websites. So in doing the local control funding formula calculations, that's the data that was used. Also, when looking at the ADA and enrollment numbers. And I know we've been in a pandemic too, which obviously has had some effects in terms of ADA and enrollment, particularly in this year we're just now ending. So, but using the 2021 data I felt was the most consistent and accurate. I also used historical data in doing trends analysis, such as tax revenue data from the county, Sonoma County office, as well as ADA and enrollment data. Now, when we get to the analysis of where cost savings and how much cost savings might be achieved under the different scenarios, that was determined by looking at comparative districts. So I identified districts that were of a similar size, but also of demographics, because there is additional state money that is paid depending on your free and reduced counts or your ELL pupil counts. So I wanted to make sure I compared apples to apples, and I selected districts that were of a similar size to each one that we looked at in the scenario. Charter schools. You have a lot of charter schools in Sonoma County, and within this area there are 14. 9 of those charter schools are what we call a local or district-controlled charter school, meaning that the governing board is the governing board of the charter and of the school district, and has the ability to kind of allocate cost within the charter's budget. So when looking at the cost structure of the districts, I did include those district-controlled charters, but I did exclude those independent charters since they are outside of each district. And in calculating the local control funding formula, that is made separate between the district's enrollment and ADA and the charter, whether it's a local dependent charter or an independent charter. Okay, next slide, please. So in analyzing the data, I compiled the current district's data on finances, personnel, full-time equivalents, facilities, the number of facilities, tax revenues, enrollment ADA, debt, and then the student demographics. And I tracked the trends that were in the enrollment and ADA tax revenues, which are the 2 most important pieces of the local control funding formula. In terms of the revenue side of a school district, this local control funding formula is over 60% of the school district's funding, and probably even more, closer to 70 or 75% in some cases. Other sources of revenue, such as federal or local revenue, I did analyze that, and it's in my report. And in each scenario, it is assumed that those amounts would not be affected by the unification or the reorganization because of the way those funding formulas work. And I did analyze those to make sure that that was a valid assumption. So it's really focusing in on that local control funding formula. That's where the changes happen. That's where the loss of this community or basic aid dollars happens, is in that local control funding formula. That's the $14 million that would be lost if all of these districts were to unify into one. So quantifying that, I then looked at the expenditure side of the budget and using those comparative districts. What does this unified district with 6,000 kids that are of similar demographics to what a West Sonoma County unified would be, what do their budgets look like? How much do they spend in various categories within their budget? And that's where I was able to develop this range of cost savings that might be achieved, and then compare that to the loss of revenue. And do we have a net positive or a net loss that results? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, local control funding formula is the most variable revenue source. And going back on the point that we made a few slides back, any reorganization would have, the new board or the incoming board would have to look at that very closely. Can we find those cost savings to fill the gap and ensure our financial stability? One of the criteria in state law for school district reorganization is that there cannot be a substantial negative impact on finances as a result of the reorganization. And so, for example, in scenario 1, no plan to cover that $14 million gap would fail to meet this criteria and would not even be approvable at the county or the state level. So, important consideration, and thus why we did this financial study first before moving on to other criteria for a reorganization. So, on the expenditure side, I compared each of the different scenarios to school districts of a similar size and type, and I compared their budgets on the current expense of education, was essentially all the educational costs excluding any capital cost or food service. I compared these districts to the districts here on the cost by the major function or activities, such as instructional cost, administrative cost, plant service cost. I compared these districts to the districts here on the natural expense classification or object codes, like salaries, benefits, books, supplies, things of that nature. I was also able to look at the J90, which is a certificated salary and benefit and full-time equivalent report that's submitted to the state by school districts, and analyze the certificated salary schedules. I also did look at the classified salary schedules. They're more difficult to compare district to district because there are classifications, but which could vary, dramatically in terms of not being standard with one another. But I could look at the total FTEs and draw some conclusions from that. Okay. Next slide, please. So, kind of the conclusions that came out of this cost analysis, which is detailed in this report, is that all of the scenarios could result in significant cost savings when comparing the different combination of districts to similar sized districts. And some of these numbers are kind of staggering. In the scenario 1, savings could range from 8 million to even 18 million. So depending on whether you're comparing the average cost to the statewide average or to the average of unified districts or to the average of those comparative. But clearly the cost savings potential is there, and that's really what we were looking for. How to get to that in a timely fashion is a bigger challenge, and that's where the real risk comes in. In comparing the cost by function, all of the, I'm going to talk about the scenario 3A in a minute, because that's the one that's this high school district plus Twin Hills. But all of the other scenarios had exceptionally high savings potential. So, for example, unionizing, which is not unifying, unionizing all of the elementary districts except for Twin Hills and West Sonoma High School District yielded a significant amount of savings that could be achieved, which kind of intuitively makes sense, particularly when you think about how you have 9 separate administrative bodies in each of those districts. And also a considerable number of school sites compared to other districts of a similar size. And I'll talk about facilities a little bit in a minute. Now, for the unification of a high school district with Twin Hills, this is the Thompson style. So West Sonoma County Unified will continue to serve for secondary purposes all of the 10 elementary districts would be unified with Twin Hills, the other state aid district. Would there be the opportunity for cost savings? Probably. In doing some of the comparisons, it looked like there wouldn't be much, or maybe none at all. But we could probably look at just the fact that you would have, one board, one superintendent, one business officer, maybe one director of maintenance, or whatever it is. There would be some opportunity for savings. How big that is, it would not be as significant as some of these other scenarios, obviously, but there would be some. Okay, and then just to kind of test all of this to make sure that it's kind of making sense, I also looked at cost savings by object code and found that there was similar savings, primarily in personnel cost. And given that there's 18 school sites compared to, say, 12 school sites in other districts of similar size, then there's smaller class sizes and things of that nature, right? Looking at the full-time equivalent staffing, there was also cost savings that could result out of that when I compared that there were 71 more FTEs in this area compared to districts of a similar size. Okay? So cost savings is there, but the revenue loss, particularly in scenario 1 and 2, is also there. And that's the challenge, because can you cut costs in advance and fast enough in order to start as a viable, financially viable district on day 1? I think scenario 1 would be very challenging to do that. Scenario 2, possibility, but would still require planning. And then scenario 3 is the less risky, because there is no revenue loss under that scenario. Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, I looked at facilities. There are 18 school sites throughout this area, and when compared to school districts that are of a similar size with enrollment, the average was 12 school sites. So you have more school sites than these comparative districts. You also have a large geographical region to serve, which has transportation challenges, of course. And I looked at that as well, and I compared the geographical square miles of each of the districts here and in total with the comparative districts. And actually found that even in those comparative districts that had more geographical miles to cover, they still only had between 11 and 13 school sites. And Ukiah being probably the closest one to you that you could compare yourself to, which I believe had, I think, 12 school sites. So what this shows is that there's a potential for consolidation of school sites down the road, and doing so there would be cost savings. But of course, even coming to that conclusion would require, facility study to be done in depth, as well as transportation studies. Okay. And then finally, I looked at long-term debt for all of the districts and the districts combined, and found it was very similar to those of like-sized districts. So just over $200 million in long-term debt. Other school districts I looked at that would be of a similar size, of about, say, 5,700 ADA, have similar levels of debt. And 70% of that is bond-related, general obligation bonds, which are voter secured. The next largest piece of long-term debt would be CalPERS and STRS, which are the pension obligations. All districts have to share in their proportional share of that liability. So it's really kind of nothing you can, that would go up or down as a result of any kind of reorganization. So long-term debt did not have any significant impact on the financial conclusions out of this study. All right, that's the end of my presentation. I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Harrington.
So, in conclusion, what are we looking at? Advantages of unification. Basically, and I'd like to read from the state document. We're referring to this. Any petition to be approved and taken to the voters, the law requires that any proposed reorganization continue to promote sound fiscal management. That's why we have to do the financial study component first, and not cause a substantial adverse effect on the proposed new district's physical status or any existing district affected by the proposed reorganization. So the advantages of unification are really in the instructional aside, have not been done yet, but it would look at a TK-12 administrative and operational cost. It would look at a continuum of instruction, and in some cases involve merging schools because of the capacity of schools. Currently, most of our singletons are not that full. They have a lot of empty space, and so that would have to be a consideration of the new school board. There are some complicating factors in the conclusion. Scenarios 1 and 2 pose the most challenges of any administration to build budgets and to match and projected loss. So they have to build a budget, projected reductions to create any type of revenue savings. Preserving funding levels. Scenario 3 is the least financially risky option to the board, as there is no significant revenue loss and there are various paths for the new district may choose to reduce cost and preserve financial benefit to the students of the county. What's being asked of the board today? No decisions will be reached tonight, but the board is asked to one of two things. One, you can choose to say, thank you, your job is done, we don't need to go further. That's one option. The other option is select an option so we can complete the report to do the educational component and the demographic component required. Because the citizens have the right to do a petition, and at least they need to know what they could do the petition on, and the board could have input into what that petition might be. So if you choose an option, we would complete the report by doing the educational components, the governance and transition between old and new district, employment rights and opportunities for teacher and classified staff, and we have to do a district demographic configuration, so we aren't creating adverse districts by population or by socioeconomics. So that would have to be done. So I'm hoping the board will make that decision by September so we can conclude this portion of the report. The following types of petitions would need to be to look at unification should the public wish to do something. Remember, the voters, this is not a county superintendent's initiative, because he or she has to be independent as it relates to the formation of the voter initiative and some other things. We have to work with the county committee. It's really the citizenry. And it's going to have to be a challenge to the parochial control of the boards. Do they want to stay in the little configurations? Is that a power issue? I don't know. But the thing is, what best serves students? That's why the high school district asked for this report. What best serves our students? And what can we do financially that best serves our community? That was the reason for the request. And I'm going to ask Erin to come up here because if this goes forward, if the board chooses an option, we complete the report, it then goes to another third-party agent called the County Committee on School District Organization. And for board members, you know each December you select your county committee for board organization member. Now that is not a member of the committee. That is the voting member who chooses the committee. So those of you who get that, board members who get that great responsibility, you get to vote. That's what you're picking, the person that gets to vote for you. And then there is a pre-existing committee. In some counties, it's the County Board of Education. In this county, the local board said, no, we want to keep control of that. So we have a county committee, which has a geographic representation. They're voted on at large by each of the districts, voting representative, and those are members by area. So the committee's in place, and Erin is the legal counsel to the committee, and she will tell you what their rights and responsibilities are should a petition from the citizenry come forward.
Thank you, Dr. Harrington. Make sure that I can be heard. So, as Dr. Harrington explained, there are actually multiple pathways that a reorganization can occur. I just want to clarify for everyone, the governing statutes that we look to when we're looking at school district reorganization largely comes from the Education Code, but then there are also regulations found in Title V that direct county committees on how certain things occur. The California Department of Education puts out I believe it's currently 12 chapters with up to 8 appendices, a guidebook for school district reorganization. But I also will concur with what's been said is that, and I know this term has been used a lot in the last 2 years, this is an unprecedented study and an unprecedented legal position. Only in that we haven't seen this done with LCFF before. So I want to say when we're looking at some of the statutes, when we're discussing this, you may see terms thrown around such as reorganization, consolidation, unionization, unification. The way that it actually works, because there's not always been consistency in the Ed Code or in Title V with the terms, they're largely interchangeable. So I want to say, if when you were looking through this and someone says, well, oh, are you consolidating, are you reorganizing? When we use the term reorganization, and those are the provisions that we're going to be looking to, it could include actually any of the three scenarios that were discussed this evening. Those would fall into the reorganization process. There are specific codes that apply to the Thompson reorganization, but the way that a proposal could come to the county committee, and I'll put a little asterisk there because there are certain circumstances under which it can be initiated by the county committee. But typically, the way that this is done, there can be reorganization proposals that are initiated by a 10% petition. That has different requirements, the 10% petition as compared to other, if local agencies, for example, the county, or if there were a municipality that was entirely within the district. Those reorganization proposals will essentially become a county committee recommendation, and they end up in front of the State Board of Education. So that's one of the other things I want to say is that the county committee, absent some circumstances, I won't go into all of the details here, but typically the county committee is one stop on the way to the State Board of Education. And actually the county committee's ability to initiate their own proposal can also occur at the direction of the State Board of Education. So we add all of these layers. The more, I would say, to the extent there is anything typical, would be a 25% petition. That's where you're seeing, this would have to be 25% of the registered voters of any of the affected districts. So a 25% petition is going to look at, gets submitted to the county superintendent, who verifies that the signatures are correct, and then it would go to the county committee. Again, I want to say that it's not 25% of the entire area, it is 25% for each of the existing potentially impacted districts. Similarly, it would follow the process that it would follow for the county committee if the governing boards of the potentially impacted districts, they could all pass a resolution and agree on a proposal to be submitted. So there are these different entities, there are these different pathways. I do want to just expand a little bit and say the circumstances under which there is solely local approval, when it doesn't have to go up to the state board, generally are going to require the consensus of all of the impacted districts. Again, I don't want to go through all of the various permutations because, as you saw, there's lots of different ways to draw this. But typically what the process would be if a petition were received, and we're going to set aside from the moment the county committee formulating their own plans, but if it were a petition were received, the county committee has 60 days after the county superintendent has verified the sufficiency of the signatures in which to hold a public hearing in the affected districts. And I do say affected districts in that situation. 10% petition has a preliminary hearing, it's a different process, but let's say we have our public hearing. The county committee then has 120 days in which to either approve or disapprove the proposal. So again, I want to say it's approve or disapprove the proposal. Absent some of the circumstances in which we would have solely local approval, it then goes to the State Board of Education for approval or disapproval. After that, it goes to the electors. So this is a process. I understand that Dr. Harrington advised the high school district board that we were looking at about 16 months to complete this portion of the study. We're looking at many, many years. I just want to manage expectations. This does not happen in 1 year. This does not happen in 2 years. There are a lot of agencies that are involved. The area of election, because I know that's a question, is actually, if it goes up to the state board, often determined by the state board. So there are legal cases and legal precedent, but there's not a clear, oh, we look at the Ed Code and this is where the lines will be. So I know that there are probably going to be a lot of questions. I am counsel to the county committee, so I will not be advising any of the districts. But if a proposal is received, or if the state board were to direct the county committee to formulate a plan or recommendation, or if they chose to, I would be the council advising on, these are the requirements. You've heard a lot about the fiscal requirement. It has to be a financially viable reorganization. I would be assisting with looking at whether or not the petitions and proposals, obviously with the experts and with the consultants, but helping the county committee know these are the criteria that have to be met in order to approve or disapprove. I am going to turn it back over to Dr. Harrington now.
Don't just leave right now.
Okay, I won't leave.
Okay. My next question to you is, Aaron, there's also another provision that allows elected officials within the jurisdiction of the proposal. For example, a city council could make the request for unification.
The majority of so a county board of, sorry, the majority, it would have to be by a majority action. It's not going to be one individual, but yes, a city council, a county board of supervisors, LAFCO, the local agency formation, I'm going to forget the acronym, but LAFCO, which deals with drawing boundaries, that is the same process as a 10% voter petition. So it would go to the county committee to either be approved or disapproved as a recommendation and would end up in front of the state board.
And the city council of Sebastopol?
As part of the district, yes. Again, it would follow the 10% process.
There are a variety of venues and avenues by which a district can, this petition process may develop and may go down. So it's not any one particular way, but it may come either nobody submits anything, one of the local boards could submit it, or one of these other agencies could submit it. Thank you. Erin covered her slides, so I just want to make sure. We're ready for questions from the governing board. Should they have any questions from us? And then we'll take questions from the audience.
And you can go on to the next slide.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's so hard.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Harrington and team. Sorry. Questions from the board?
I was just curious, in the scenario 3, when it says the remaining 9 elementary districts would then unionize, is it likely that there would be some school closings?
That would be the decision of a new board. They would have to look at that, whether it's functional. You need to know that within one of those districts, we'll be getting a notice from the county superintendent about potential lapsation. Lapsation is a process whereby the district does not meet its minimum number of students to be operational. We have 2 districts in the county that are on the verge of lapsation. One resides within your boundaries. One resides within the Point Arena boundaries. It's a Sonoma district, but they go to Point Arena for high school. Those 2 districts, because of declining enrollment, are on the verge. The best example would be Novato. We have, Marin has 2 of our districts. They are Liberty and Union. They are in partially Sonoma and partially Marin. Both Liberty and Union lapsed first. Union lapsed first, then it went into Liberty, so the students from Union went over to Liberty. Liberty lasted for 2 years, it lapsed, and they went into Lincoln. So those 3 districts have all lapsed into one or the other, and they have a total of 15 students currently. So, as you can see, declining enrollment is all over the state, but that's what lapsation is. So you have a district that would lapse, and it would be absorbed by the next local district. And the county committee would have to look at that and decide where those assets and territory go.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Julie?
I don't have any questions right now.
Jeannie?
Yeah, I do, thank you. One of my questions is, where in this report is the discussion regarding parcel tax? It seems that the study is not complete without including each of the district's parcel taxes in each district's loss column. As you have stated in the study, each of the district's parcel taxes would have to be set aside, meaning lost revenue. There needs to be a line item for each district and what their parcel tax is and what that loss would be. It cannot be ignored because it's dollars we all count on for our operational purposes.
Christy, do you want to, you looked at parcel tax?
Yeah, parcel taxes often have expirations, but regardless, if there was a reorganization, they would need to be reauthorized, and to the extent they're not, yes, you're correct. There would be additional loss in revenue that would be added to the losses that are projected for the local control funding formula. And those revenue losses would need to be made up with cost savings identified by the new board.
Just so we're clear, when you say reauthorization, you mean revote, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, you have to go out for another election.
Yes.
And they do have expiration dates, so I don't know coincidentally when those dates are, though.
Right.
Right. My other concern is that, the reason I ask this is because I'm pretty certain that the public's not aware of this. It's only mentioned just briefly that we would have to reauthorize those, which means we'd have to hold a parcel tax election. This district, when we went out for a parcel tax back a couple of years ago, it cost us $120,000. Yes, in fact, those dollars can be recouped, and you can pay yourself back if the parcel tax passes. But my very big concern is with the spotty economy right now, and if we had to give up our $1.7 million parcel tax here for the high school, and I don't know what Twin Hills is, which I suspect it's substantial, I don't believe that we could ever pass a parcel tax that would equal those amounts of funding, and that causes a real concern for me.
And it could possibly be on a smaller territory, therefore not generating the same dollar amount that you currently are generating, because you might go to 2 different districts or 3 different, there's different options depending on which option.
That's true.
So you can't predetermine that until once you see which option you're in. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. In regards to scenario 2, it didn't get mentioned in the presentation, but I think it's important to point out that there is no cost associated with having the second high school in the River District or reopening El Molino. And I think that's kind of an important thing to point out, because if you're saying 3 to 5 million in consolidating costs, but then you're going to add in approximately 6.6 million to open that up, that becomes problematic, because, and just for easy math, 6.6 million is about 22% of our annual budget, which would be about, it's not exact, but it's a quick number. I just want to make sure that is not included, correct?
That is, no, Christy and I talked about that. Go ahead, Christy.
Yes, well, looking at the potential for cost savings, comparing it to other districts, they're all running a high school, so there is kind of built into that an assumption that there would be operating costs in that new high school. However, reopening it, could be, in terms of the facility and all of that, could be significant. So yes, I would recommend in any of these scenarios that you take a hard look at what the facility use, cost, condition, all of that before, and operational before reopening or considering closing or whatever you're doing with the facility.
Kathy, go ahead, Jeannie.
Do you have something else you wanted to add?
go ahead.
Okay. One of my other concerns is when we're looking at scenario 3, if all of the remaining 9 elementary districts, if you take the high school and Twin Hills out of the equation, if they were to consolidate, there was stated to be a significant potential savings of 7 million. But my biggest concern is, what does that really mean? How many sites would we lose? How many school sites would close? How many teachers would we lose? How many teachers would have to be laid off? And I'm sure the answer is, well, it would be determined based on a new board and a new plan. But it's concerning to me that you start losing local control, and you start having to have kids go from one particular close-knit area to a much further distance. And again, then that creates transportation costs. And I just don't know if that satisfies the needs of the community. Laying off teachers means less program. Less program means less students. And it was stated that the West County High School District had 35 to 40 teachers in excess. I would guarantee you that if you were to ask any one of them, they certainly wouldn't want to raise their hand. And most of our teachers couldn't teach in elementary or middle school because they don't have that sort of credential. So that could be a real problem. Either we're laying off high school teachers, or we're laying off elementary teachers, or we're laying off both. You state that you come to that number based on comparing us to other districts of like size. And as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty relative to what our school district might be teaching and what they might be teaching and what might be available. If we were to lose 35 to 40 teachers here in the high school district, we would definitely lose our 7-period day, which we know is the draw for many students to come out of area. And if we lose the teachers, we lose the programs, and then we lose the students because they're not going to come here. Those are some of my other concerns.
I have one question, Patrick, if I can.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Also, I think that you said that when districts are unified, you used teacher salaries and you took an average, where I was under the impression that usually when they're unified, the lower paid teacher salaries move up to the highest
Well,
paid
it used to
teacher
be,
salaries.
that you would take the highest schedule and absorb it. That's no longer the case. It's an average of the schedules. Underneath the state law was changed several years back.
So one school district, the teachers would be paid less and the others
Well,
would
it's
be paid
average.
more.
The new board sets the schedule. The union would have to negotiate with the new board. The new collective bargaining agreement would have to be developed. All of that has to be predetermined. New salary and benefits would have to be predetermined by a new board.
Okay. Angie? Do you need anything else before we turn over to the public?
I know, Christy, you talked about the charter schools, and you said that in fact, the charter schools that were dependent, you put those dollars in, but also it was mentioned in your, in the full report that some of those charters would have to be rechartered under the new school district. And if I'm not mistaken, that's a process and also costs money to do that, I'm afraid, with time and lawyers and all of that. So can you answer, can you help with that clarification?
They could be procedurally set up so they could just absorb the pre-existing charters and let them expiration dates expire. Or they could choose to have them reauthorized and set a new expiration date. Aaron, pretty much the process. It's to be predetermined by the new board.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it. And one thing I was going to answer Julie's question about something else I just thought of, which relates to salary schedules and benefits. The reason that law changed was what districts would do is they would shop around, and if you're going to get annexed to the highest salary schedule, guess who you would incorporate into your district?
Yeah.
So that way that you would all default to that schedule. That's why the state changed the law. It should be built on students and what best serves students.
I do have one other question, Patrick. It's about Gravenstein being basic aid. I've talked to a number of people from that district, and they're quite emphatic in the fact that they're not basic aid. So I guess I'm curious as to how you came up.
Well, it's easy to figure. Basically, Gravenstein, many of our elementary districts do this process. Sarah, I'll let you talk about it, but basically they carve out certain grade levels, and this is the district. Kindergarten, first grade is our district. Second through sixth grade is our charter school. And therefore, because we only have a small amount of district students, we get basic aid and we get basic aid supplemental. We have the most basic aid supplementals in the state of California because of this uniqueness that was developed several years back. The state evaluates this every year, and that's why we always tell districts, do not count on it as ongoing revenue, because it can come in one budget year and go out the next budget year. Sarah, you monitor this for me.
Yeah, we do. We look at it every year, actually every tax period. There's two tests that you do when you do a calculation to see if it's an excess tax basic aid district. And the two types of tests determine if you get a certain type of property taxes. There's basic aid for district of residence purposes, and there's district of residence, and there's basic aid for ERAF purposes, which is a type of tax, but both of them classify them as a basic aid district, just as Dr. Harrington mentioned, because they've carved out a portion of their site that they're serving, and those are the students that they're counting, and then the same. We have several of those in our county that are considered that. So then they get basic aid supplemental, a backfill of property taxes for the taxes that go to their charter schools. It's rather complicated in our area, as Christy has come to be familiar with. We're unique.
I mean, here's another example that you may not be aware of, or you might, those of you who live in Sebastopol. Sebastopol had a redevelopment district at one time.
Yeah.
And the redevelopment districts were dissolved by the Governor Brown because he found out that the state was backfilling 20% of the property taxes because everybody was carving out these redevelopment districts. This was during the recessionary period. So redevelopment went away. Sebastopol, because I sit on the tax board, oversight board for school districts, paid off their redevelopment bonds. Once the redevelopment bonds were paid off, it's a basic aid district because guess what? The 20% of the property tax that was carved out is now back on their tax rolls, and they became basic aid last year, I believe, because that bond was paid off. So people have to look at all sorts of things. City councils make decisions that have an impact on school districts, and all those things have to be monitored carefully.
Okay, I know we have a couple comment cards for speakers. If you'd like to speak, fill out a comment card. Otherwise, come up and speak now.
Want to read them?
Okay. Great. Debbie Ramirez.
Hello, can you hear me okay with the mask on? Okay. So this feasibility report provides answers to some questions about our school configuration options in West County. It also raises some questions. I recognize that the auditors chose these hypothetical scenarios in the report to reflect best economic effects of school district organization. I have 4 questions. 1, I question why Harmony was included with the Sebastopol feeder district in scenario 2, as historically that district has been grouped with the far west districts feeding El Molino. I'm just curious about why that happened. I wonder if a scenario 2 version could be crafted with one or more elementary districts opting out of unification and remaining feeders to their respective high school. I'd just like to hear if those
That is a
are
possibility.
Okay.
Because we don't know who would consolidate. But it could say that these 6 and these 3 opted out. They would all be part of the West Sonoma County Union, we'll call it Union High School District, but within it, it has a consolidated district, and it may have some, what I would call stringer districts, probably the peripheral smalls.
Okay. And then scenario 3 outlines the creation of one TK through 12 district encompassing Twin Hills and the high school district, with the remaining elementary districts combining and serving as a feeder district to the remaining high school. It's not clear to me what the boundaries of this district would be, because none of the facilities owned by the high school district are located within Twin Hill boundaries.
Those boundaries overlap. Right now, you have Twin Hills in your high school district. When you look at that map, all the yellow would be served by the high school component, and Twin Hills is within that group.
But if somebody lived here at this address,
Mm-hmm.
they wouldn't be a Twin Hills Elementary student.
No, they would be in the local elementary district that was here.
Yeah. So I just don't understand how that works.
Well, that works. That's a Thompson.
That's the Thompson.
That's a
Okay.
Thompson.
All right. And then, all right, and finally, this is more about the community engagement and the discussion that would be forthcoming. The study outlines 3 general configuration scenarios and the associated possible financial savings. But it's also important to note that the feeder districts have not yet to begin evaluating the various options. I don't even know if this report was distributed to the feeder districts.
They were all noticed that it's going online tonight, so they were all told. But this is the board that requested it,
Right.
so they're the
But moving
receivers.
forward, before a reconfiguration petition is proposed, maybe not by this district, but by one of the other methods described, does SCO intend to facilitate any conversation, provide any fiscal or technical support with the process, and what might that look like?
Okay. Well, we're currently paying for all of this. And if we are requested to have a report, I guess we would provide someone to give the report to the elementary districts. Probably not to this depth, because I'm paying legal fees and some other things up here. But we would probably cover the questions with the local board.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's it for comment cards? Okay. Anything else from the board?
Greg, do you have anything to add? Since everybody spoke, we didn't call on you, so I don't want you to feel left out.
No, just that,
Someone's coming forward anyway, so go ahead and speak.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Andrea Hagan, and I've been in the community for almost 30 years. I taught at Twin Hills for the last 7 years. Before that, I taught at Brookhaven for 18 years. My son went to Gravenstein with some board members' kids. I've had some board members' kids. This is just sort of a big picture thing. I would really wonder what it would be like, and would love to just explore the idea, kind of like a thought process of what it would be like of, instead of thinking of us losing local control because one of our school districts merges with another, that we think of all of Sebastopol as local, or all of West County as local. We are so small, we could start at Gravenstein and walk to Brookhaven in a day and stop at Twin Hills for lunch and probably be home for dinner. I mean, we could ride our bike in less than an hour. So the idea of losing local control because a school is closing, I'd just like to think about what would be different. Also, the idea that losing teachers, and here being a teacher, I'm probably gonna get pilloried, but losing teachers and losing schools does not necessarily mean losing program. It can mean building program because you're saving money, right? So that's something I think to look at also. And then a specific question, because I came late and I'm sorry, I apologize, and a lot of people did a lot of work, and thank you. But in scenario 1, I'm not sure that I saw the savings that would be there when we lost a number of administrators and all of the things that go along with having each district have its own district office. Mm-hmm. Was that part of scenario 1? Because I heard it in other scenarios.
Well, you've asked several questions. Let me talk about the teacher situation. We had 87 teaching slots go unfilled in this county. We have a teacher shortage. So teachers living here, depending on their credential, but most of our slots are secondary and elementary slots. They're spread evenly across the board. So we are short. And so how do we cover those assignments? With either substitutes or retirees coming back into the system to try to cover those on partials. But I just want everyone to know, we have a severe teacher shortage that's materialized statewide. And then, Christy, you want to answer her question as it relates to the
Sure.
costs?
Yeah, the question was in terms of administrative costs. So we're talking about board, superintendent, business office, HR. Currently, the entire area, West Sonoma with all the districts, spends $8.3 million annually. And the average of a comparable size district is $4.9 million. So there would be a potential savings of $3.4 million annually just in general administrative cost.
And those are salary dollars, so they can be shifted in the budget.
Right, and just because Ms. Hagan came late, but unfortunately in scenario one, because of the loss of basic aid, it's a net loss of $14 million in funding. So although we could potentially save $5 million in salary, we're still short $9 million in funding just to start, if that scenario would be something to look at. You're welcome. Any other questions from the board?
Greg, go ahead.
Greg was going to say something.
Thank you, Dr. Harrington. I just wanted to thank the board for asking this question, and certainly part of your fiduciary responsibility financially is to explore how to kind of work on the structural deficit. So Dr. Harrington's support of this study and the team's support of this study is giving you information to start to make some potential possible solutions or decisions.
And this board's initiative has created, I'm going to be doing a similar report, not the same results, but a similar report for Santa Rosa City Schools. They also initiated based on your initiative because they are faced with the same economic issues you're faced with. And so they're looking at all their options just like you're looking at your options.
I just want to point out a couple things as we get ready to wrap up. First off, for those at home on Zoom or YouTube that you can't ask questions this evening, please email any of us and we will attempt to get those answers for you if it hasn't already been answered. I would imagine there might be some questions that'll come up in the next day or two that we could send off to Dr. Harrington and then get some answers back. So please take the opportunity to do that. Secondly, I'd like to thank Dr. Harrington and staff and everyone for actually doing the study, coming tonight, presenting the study, so that we can kind of look at our options. As Dr. Harrington mentioned earlier, as far as next steps and our role and what we're charged with now is to look at this. We will be bringing this back in August for possible action to explore one of the three options if we want to go further or not. Those are our choices. Dr. Harrington only wants to pay one time, so we have to pick an option if we so choose, or not pick an option. There's lots of questions, and I think this is one of those opportunities where we do need a lot of community input for those that have a vested interest or want to consider what some of these scenarios look like. And I appreciate Ms. Hagan saying what she's saying. There's a lot of thoughts here, control, money, bettering the students, but if we can just figure out what's best for our community and best for our students, that's what we need to do. But we have a lot to think about. So that's our charge coming back in August, is to look at kind of which one of these options, if any, we so choose. So again, people out in the crowd, people watching, if you have questions, comments, concerns, direction you'd like to see us go, please let us know. This is about you and about what you want, and it's not about what we want, it's about what the community needs going forward. Because as, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, but as the lawyer pointed out, Aaron, I believe?
Aaron, yeah.
This is a several year away process and project. So if we choose to go down one of these paths, this is really thinking about the future. So we need all your input.
This is just the first step in
Absolutely.
a long process.
Yes.
So again, thank everyone, and I appreciate everyone coming. And with that, this meeting's adjourned.
Who they clap?